What is the best Pokemon design? Not which Pokemon is the strongest or which one is my favorite, but which one is objectively the best Pokemon design. And can we use data to get a real answer? To try to answer this question, we're going to look at data collected through RatePokemon.com. It's a community project I launched back in March that aims to convert Pokemon designs to data. The site presents viewers with a random Pokemon design and requests ratings on 9 different scales, from relatively objective ratings like how complex or humanoid the design is, to very subjective ones like how beautiful it is or how much you like it. The idea is to aggregate ratings from as many different people as possible so that we can use this data to better understand Pokemon designs, including what makes a good Pokemon design. So far, we've had nearly 3,000 participants giving out 72,000 unique ratings, which works out to every single Pokemon design being rated by at least 58 different people. That is fantastic data. But if we want to use this data to answer a big question, like what is the best Pokemon design, we need to be really specific. What do we mean by the best? One way to look at it is the most popular Pokemon design. The best design is the one that the fanbase as a whole likes the most. Makes sense. To figure that out, we just need to sort the Pokemon by popularity and identify which one is the highest. Or rather, which ones, because it's a tie between Standard Wooper and Mimikyu, both with a popularity rating of 4.54. So there you go. Wooper and Mimikyu are the best Pokemon designs. Except it's not really that simple, right? They are both great Pokemon designs, but are they really representative of what Pokemon look like? I think we can look at the question a different way, one that goes a little bit deeper. Maybe a good Pokemon design isn't necessarily one that everyone likes, but one that fits well within the aesthetic of Pokemon in general. So the best design would be one that looks the most like every other Pokemon, the most average Pokemon design. Working that out takes a few steps. First, we'll calculate the global average of each rating, the average scores across all Pokemon designs for complexity, realism, artificiality, fantasy, humanoid, cuteness, coolness, and beauty. There are definitely some interesting trends we can see in these plots, but that's not what this video is about. We're skipping popularity because we want to look exclusively at the designs themselves, not at how much people like them. Next, we can calculate how close or how far each Pokemon score is from the average. For example, Mimikyu has an average rating of 1.22 on the humanoid scale. The global average humanoid score is 2.15. Most Pokemon are not very humanoid at all. So Mimikyu is 0.93 points from the humanoid average. I've been calling this the distance, how far each score is from the average. These numbers by themselves don't tell us very much, but we can see that for each category, some Pokemon are very close to the average, and others are quite far. But then we can take all 8 distance measurements for each Pokemon and find their average. I'm calling this the divergence score, basically a measure of how close each Pokemon design is to the average. A lower divergence score means a more average Pokemon. A higher score, a less average Pokemon. For Mimikyu, that score is 0.88. Now we can do the same thing we did for popularity and sort every Pokemon by their divergence score. The interesting thing to note here is that Pokemon don't typically come that close to the average across all categories. A Pokemon that is closer to the average in one tends to be farther from the average in others, and vice versa, so that most Pokemon tend to be grouped in this narrow band. Close to the average, but not quite. We can zoom into this plot a bit to get a better look, and we see that the Pokemon with the lowest divergence score, that is, the most average Pokemon, is Larvitar. The Pokemon that is most like other Pokemon, the Pokemon design that best fits with every other Pokemon design, is Larvitar.
You like Larvitar?
I do like Larvitar. Larvitar is another great answer for the best Pokemon design, but I think that it's still an incomplete answer. If we plot divergence scores against popularity and identify Larvitar, we see that Larvitar is above average in popularity. Its popularity score is 3.88, reasonably higher than the global average of 3.54. But it's not one of the most popular Pokemon. Here's the trend line showing how popularity and divergence are related. There's certainly a lot of noise, but it's clear that the most average Pokemon are popular, but not that popular. Both the least popular and most popular Pokemon designs tend to look less like an average Pokemon. I think that being average, looking like a Pokemon, is a hallmark of a good Pokemon design. But does it really make sense to call the most average Pokemon the best Pokemon design when the most popular Pokemon are less average? I think we can find a way to take both popularity and the design of Pokemon in general into account. Rather than looking at all Pokemon designs, I think it makes sense to focus only on the Pokemon that have a popularity rating of 4 or higher. Those are the most liked Pokemon designs. Why don't we find the most average design within that group? We'll ignore every Pokemon that has a popularity rating below 4, but use the same methodology. Calculate the global averages for the group, measure the distance between each Pokemon score and the global average of that rating, and then average those distance measurements to find the divergence score. We plot divergence score over popularity, and we find that Alolan Sandslash is the most average Pokemon among those with a popularity of 4 or higher. Now that's a bad answer. I don't know how Alolan Sandslash landed above 4 in popularity.
That is kind of random.
This particular method does prioritize averageness, right? A low divergence score over popularity. We are gating by popularity, but ultimately picking the one with the lowest divergence. But that's more a result of this method rather than a deliberate choice. And Alolan Sandslash still has a relatively low popularity rating within this group. For example, out here, we see Flygon has a much higher popularity rating than Alolan Sandslash and only a slightly higher divergence score. That brings up another interesting angle, the last one we'll look at today. Following my methodology, Alolan Sandslash is the best Pokemon design, but I disagree. My preferences don't always line up with the fandom as a whole, so the best Pokemon design is not necessarily the best Pokemon design for me. I have rated every single Pokemon design, so let's run through the calculations again, but instead of using the average ratings, we'll use only my ratings. There's a lot more noise and uncertainty here because I can only give ratings in whole numbers. I can't give a 3.78. I have to choose between a 3 and a 4. Plus, things like my mood that day could affect whether I give higher or lower ratings, or I could even misclick and give a rating that I didn't mean to. These mistakes can get erased or at least smoothed out in the averages, but not in my ratings only. Anyway, here's the distribution of how much I like Pokemon designs, and how each Pokemon design ratings diverge from my average ratings. But again, we're only going to look at the ones I rated 4 or 5, and their divergence scores look like this. The lowest divergence score amongst the Pokemon I rated 4 or 5 is Standard Typhlosion. Truly a very average Pokemon design, but one I like anyway. Certainly better than the Alolan Sandslash. Still, I rated it a 4, not a 5, so I think we can do better. The lowest divergence score, and again, this is the divergence from my own other scores, the lowest one in the 5 column is Grafaiai. And I think that's perfect. I didn't quite like Grafaiai when I first saw it, but it really grew on me the more I looked at it, the more I used it in the game. So I'll happily accept that Grafaiai is the best Pokemon design for me. So there you have it. Depending on how you look at the question, the best Pokemon design could be Wooper and Mimikyu, Larvitar, Alolan Sandslash, Flygon, or in my case, Grafaiai. So what's the worst Pokemon? We can run through all the same methodology, but look at the opposite end of the scales. The least popular Pokemon is Crabominable. Sorry, Crabominable fans, I'm with you, but most people are not. The Pokemon with the highest divergence score overall, so the Pokemon that looks the least like every other Pokemon, is Iron Valiant. That one's not a surprise, but Iron Valiant is actually quite a popular Pokemon. So if we want to find the worst Pokemon design, we should focus on the low end of popularity ratings, only those with an average below 3. Here are the divergence scores considering only the least popular Pokemon. The Pokemon with the highest divergence from this group is Origin Dialga. I'd be happy to call Origin Dialga the worst Pokemon design and call it a day, but maybe high divergence isn't what we should be looking for in this case. High divergence in this context means the Pokemon that least looks like an unpopular Pokemon, and honestly that kind of sounds like a good thing. So instead, what is the Pokemon with the lowest divergence from this group? The one that looks the most like an unpopular Pokemon. That's Grumpig. Poor thing. It's not great, but I don't think it's that bad. But again, we can look farther out, over here, where there's a Pokemon with just a smidge more divergence, but much lower popularity. Volbeat. I did not realize Volbeat was so despised. And for me, we'll focus on the ones I rated 1 or 2. This is how they diverge from the average of the group. The design that looks the most like a Pokemon I don't like is Gigantamax Meowth. That's fair, but it is a design I rated 2, not 1. The lowest divergence score of the Pokemon I rated 1 was Cobalion. I really don't like Cobalion. I think it looks super awkward, but honestly, I probably would have given it something more like a 1.4 if I could have. There are certainly worse Pokemon than Cobalion. For example, Incarnate Enamorus, the Pokemon with the highest divergence of this group. So, depending on how you look at it, the worst Pokemon design may be Crabominable, Iron Valiant, Grumpig, Origin Dialga, Volbeat, or, for me, Enamorus. It's important to keep in mind that although the data on rate Pokemon is very strong, it isn't perfect. On the level of a single person, the scores you can give can be affected by misclicks or your mood, but in theory, those will be smoothed out by all the other ratings. The more people contribute, the closer to the real number we can get. But even the averages aren't perfect because it's a living data set. People are still contributing, ratings are still coming in, which means that the averages can change, and they do. The data I used in this video was downloaded from the site on the afternoon of October 15th, 2023. A week earlier, when I was setting everything up, writing and testing the scripts that I used to process the data and generate the plots, some of the results were different. Do you want to know some of the other Pokemon that were the most average Pokemon before?
Okay.
Rhyhorn was the first one that I got.
Some you can even write on.
The next one that I remember was Fuecoco. The most popular never changed, but the Pokemon that came out as the least popular, at one point it was, I think, Therian Enamorus, not even Incarnate, but Therian Enamorus. Crabominable came up before and was the one when I ran the final data. And Illumise was also one of the least popular Pokemon. Yeah, Volbeat and Illumise are both down there for some reason.
I mean, they have absolutely nothing to offer, but how's Delibird not on there?
If I ran the exact same scripts now, some of them would probably change again. The best and worst Pokemon designs I found today aren't definitive, but they should be pretty close anyway. At least for the methodology that I used. There are other ways you could look for the best designs using the same data. I made certain decisions about how to process the data to try to maintain consistency across different plots, to make for better visuals, or even to make the video better. For example, instead of just slicing off the highest rated Pokemon and using them for my calculations, I considered using the popularity rating as a weight to push the averages toward what popular Pokemon look like. But it barely made a difference compared to the unweighted averages, so it wasn't interesting. I didn't tamper with the data, but different methods would likely yield different results. The dataset I used also only included Pokemon up to Miraidon. The Pokemon from the Teal Mask hadn't been added yet, but they have now. Walking Wake, Iron Leaves, and every Teal Mask Pokemon are now available to be rated. Head to ratepkmn.com or click the link in the description. If you're one of the first 50 or so people, you're guaranteed to see those Pokemon first. After that, they'll just be shuffled in with all the rest. Oh, and we've also added 2 small features to the Rate Pokemon Data Explorer. First, you can now filter the results of the top 20, so you can look at the top 20 coolest normal type Pokemon, or whatever. The graph also now includes a best fit line in red, a linear regression line that shows the relationship between the X and Y values. Linear regression may not always be the most detailed way to see those relationships, but it's super useful anyway. Check it out. I hope you enjoyed this video. Making it was a lot of work. I had to learn a whole new programming language for the data analysis, but I had fun and I think the results are pretty good. I want to give a special shout out to Musa, who is the newest member of the Libros and also gave me a ton of help in figuring out how to use R for this purpose. And of course, thank you Stapo, the developer behind Rate Pokemon. If you want to support more videos like this and Rate Pokemon and all of the other Pokemon videos I make, you can support me on Ko-fi or become a channel member. I make very little from YouTube ads, so I rely on supporter income to keep things going. Links are in the description. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next chapter.